So good evening and welcome. I'm feeling dark again, aren't I? Don't know how to do this to make it lighter, but we'll have a go. Hope you're all well. Keep forgetting to put my phone on to check where we are. So I'm going to write here. Hello. Hello, pal. I've just been drinking water like a fool because I went to Medina's for lunch today and had so much garlic. I feel like my mouth's on like. How are we all doing? How are we all doing? Okay, if you can, please put something into the chat so that we can have a little look about if anybody's on. Yeah, I can see that there's two people on the phone. Hi Jenny, how are you? All right, so I was talking in Pilates tonight, so this is nothing to do with the talk. I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes now, just to allow as many people as we can to come on to the talk before I get going. We're talking today about Pilates and about how we're doing like classical Pilates and about Les Mills have set up Pilates qualification. It takes 2 days. And it takes years of practice really to get Pilates, really good enough. And about how Pilates works by going over and over and over and over the same thing time and time again until it clicks. And at the end of the class, one lady came up to me and she said, do you know what? I've been coming to Pilates for X amount of years now, and that's the first time I've been able to do a roll up. So even though she'd got older, she could do something that her younger self couldn't do. And I love the fact of that because I think that kind of effort pays off. And I think Pilates, in the way it trains spinal articulation, is just phenomenal and will allow you to keep, improving your body. And I think the same thing with these talks. I don't think I've done a cafe talk that hasn't included brain health in it. The research on brain health continues. And I think it's the kind of thing where you need to read it again and again and again and again and again until you are confident and you know exactly why you're doing these exercises, not just for weight loss, but for your protection for your older self. And I ummed and ahed about the time. So many things are now called midlife. And I keep thinking like, okay, I'm 63. I'm 63 next week. If I'm midlife, that means I'm going to live till 126, which I doubt it. So why is like over 50 called midlife? It doesn't make sense to me. And I think what they're saying is you're not young, but you're not decrepit and old. Okay, so you're out of the young phase, but you're not in the doddery old phase where you need care. And some of the work that I was looking at is to do with aging. Now you can say like, well, we're always aging, Rachel. We're aging from the day we're born, we start aging. But there is a specific time where your body ages faster. And they've identified this very clearly. 34, 60 and 82. All right. So once you come to 60, the aging process speeds up a little bit. And I can vouch for that. I can definitely tell you that if you look at a photo of me 4 years ago, I look much better than I do now. I'm fitter now, but my skin is different and my hair is different. My hair's gone thinner and my skin's gone thinner and, normal aging things. And I think it's the same with the brain. We don't notice how the brain ages until we notice we can't do the same thing. So, whereas we used to be able to do something, then it becomes a little bit more taxing, such as remembering somebody's name, remembering where you parked a car, remembering your password, remembering those 3 little numbers. But also the whole thing of how do we protect the brain from aging? And I'm fascinated by this. We have this family kind of link with dementia and Alzheimer's. I don't want to be that person. So I'm always very driven by the work into brain and aging. And once again, we are looking at the research around this, but also making it kind of relevant to you. And relevant to cafe, really, I suppose, because we talk about these things all the time. And I think Is it worth going over it again? And I keep thinking like, yeah, probably is. So, you know, we know that we can't slow down the aging process, okay? But there's so much evidence now that not exercising is causing disease. And that if you do then take up exercise, you can reverse some of the diseases that we've picked up. I'm in a group on Facebook all about osteoporosis. It's a worldwide group. And so you've got different people with different opinions. And mostly I listen to the chat, but sometimes they do contribute. And they were talking this week, is walking of any benefit to osteoporosis? And there's loads of people going, no, you've got to weight train. And I was thinking like, yeah, but you don't. Because if you are inactive, you're not going to suddenly go to the gym. So I had to look up some papers about walking. Anyway, so I did a little post on it, didn't I? So many people in my class have said that they were diagnosed with osteoporosis and they were now osteopenic, or they were osteopenic, remember that's pre-osteoporosis, they were osteopenic and they had reversed it. And all of these things give you great kind of, I would think, confidence that you're never too old and it's never too late. And yes, it would be great if we were all like brilliant and, we've had a most active, fit life all our lives. But sometimes we for whatever reasons, whether it was our upbringing, whether it was the chances that we had, whether it was money issues, whether, it was the influence of our parents, we can't really change the past, but we can change the future. We can step forward into the future with more confidence that we're doing the right things. There's nothing massively new that I'm going to be telling you today, but I have gone and researched, I think, 6 papers that I think are significant. And I'm going to start with one that was released in March this year. It was released into the Lancet, and it's called The Neuroprotective Mechanisms of Exercise and the Importance of Fitness for Healthy Brain Aging. So there's 2 elements to this. So first of all, neuroprotective, so protecting the actual brain itself. And remember, we talked about there's a difference between cognitive health and mental health, so that cognitive health was related to the actual structure of the brain. The mechanisms of how exercise does it, but also the importance of fitness. And I thought this was a very interesting one, because instead of saying 150 minutes of walking a week, it was saying work on your fitness, you get more benefits. And they've got a lovely little chart displaying this about how fitness works and how how you can change your brain. And they've got a Venn diagram, and they're going things like nutrition and sleep and social interactions important, and also any kind of medical conditions. But in the middle, fitness is all key to making this change. And what they're saying, and I'm going to read you some of the paper, or I'm going to read you the summary of the paper, which says this: aging is scientifically, I can't even say it, my brain. Aging is fascinating and complex biological occurrence characterized by the morphological and functional changes due to accumulated molecular and cellular damage impairing tissue and organ function. And I thought, if you could ever write one sentence that explains about brain health, that was probably it. So it's fascinating and it's complex, looking at the way that we can change the grey matter and function due to both molecular and cellular damage to tissues and organ function. So all of the tissues in the body, and they're talking about all the different diseases, and they were saying that aging is often accompanied by cognitive decline, and it's the biggest known risk factors for Alzheimer's, which is the most common form of dementia. But there was the evidence that not exercise and having an unhealthy lifestyle, so eating too many processed foods, smoking, drinking, having a high stress life, accelerated the aging of your brain, whilst regular physical activity, and I think I've been saying to you all, I think you've all been very determined this cafe, haven't you, to kind of get it done. It's the regularity. So even if you only do half of the session, if you at least do something every day, you will get such quick responses in 6 weeks, let me tell you. So the high cardiorespiratory fitness, okay, so to do with both the pumping of the blood and your breathing, can mitigate cognitive impairment and reduce the risk of dementia. And I thought this was quite an interesting study because it looks at past work. They looked at Alzheimer's disease, they looked at normal aging, they looked at what we call the cognitive reserve. Remember we talked about if you have a cup full of something, that you've always got something in reserve when you get to a stressed time, so that you can, that whole thing about you can't pour from an empty cup. And then the other one that I really like the sound of is an older paper. So this was done in 2012 and it was published in Obesity. And what they're saying is there's a massive link between obesity and cognitive health. And that whilst we all understand that physical activity and exercising can improve brain plasticity, so it is what called neurogenerative, okay, so it makes new cells. Neuroadaptive, it can adapt and change depending on your situation. And neuroprotective, it can protect those tissues and organs that we talked at. Again, what they're saying is that they prevent obesity, they prevent cancers, they prevent depression, and the decline in cognition associated with aging and other diseases like Parkinson's, stroke, head or spinal injuries, and that not exercising contributed to increased blood pressure, heart failure, stress, and suppression of your immune system. And they looked at what they call the mechanisms, looking at the adaptations to do with how the brain organises all your body working together. Now, when I posted up tonight, I put a picture that I've used before that kind of looks at the relationship between all the organs in the body for when we're exercising. It's quite a complex one, but the growing evidence that insufficient activity, anything associated with what we call a modern lifestyle, is a major contributor to obesity, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, cancer and depression. And I'm going to go back to the osteoporosis quickly here, because somebody said to me the other day as well, thin white female is considered to be like the high risk thing. But, I'm heavy, therefore I am protecting my bones because I'm carrying extra weight. And I think they used to think like if people were heavy boned or you were slightly heavier, that was protective towards bones. And what they're finding out now is it only works if you're heavier due to muscle mass and not due to fat mass, because of that interruption between how the brain monitors and controls a whole system, and how that influences bone health. And whilst there's been like this massive research, I would think really only in the past 40 years, on what they call the neurobiology of exercise, there's still not the link between the doctors telling you need to exercise in order to be healthy. I think we're still at the stage of trying to, give out pills. But I think the accepted thing that the brain controls things. So it controls our mental health, it controls our physiological health, the tissues and the organs that we talked about. But it also controls, and this is really interesting for me, what they call behavioural processes. So do you remember on week 1, we talked about how do I get more confident to exercise? How do I make that physical change from being where I am to where I want to be? How do I feel like, you know, I can do it? You know, it's not too late, and it doesn't matter that, you know, all of the things that happen when we get older. As we age, we kind of go like, oh, I'm not as fit as I used to be. I've put on weight. I'm getting old. Blah 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 blah. Society doesn't help us, does it? Because it tells you take it easy. But they now realizing that when you exercise, not only do you have that influence on the muscle itself, so you can do more, you have an influence on that confidence, that self-esteem, and that the brain functioning, that social, developmental, environmental, you know, we talk about your family and the people around you, alters the gene expression. And it is that altering of the gene expression that makes the changes in brain function and behaviour. And I was reading this paper and I was thinking, like, this is so fascinating, because what they're saying is that the circuits that regulate feeding, mood, pleasure, pain, memories, reward for good behaviour, wanting or liking things, or what they call executive functions, where you do problem solving, where you can manage your life, is linked very strongly with lifestyle change. So eating well, sleeping well, and exercising. So when we look at these neural circuits and the kind of decision making that we do, when they first started to look at this 40 years ago, they simply looked at fitness as in ways of improving your muscle or your bone health. You know, osteoporosis, you exercise. You're a bit overweight, you exercise. But what they're saying is that our brain actually controls how we feel about exercise, how we make decisions about exercise, how we think about dealing with issues. You know, if you're having a bad day, do you go out there and do a HIIT workout, or if you've had a bad day, do you sit down and eat your chocolate biscuits? And it was really interesting because one lady's always waiting for me when I teach my Pilates class, and you know, I usually go down just about 20 to 6 to set everything up. The class starts at 6 and she goes like, I daren't go home. She goes, because if I go home after work, I'll just fall asleep in the chair. And she says, I know when I come, I'll feel so much better. And she spends the first 5 minutes yawning. But when she comes out to the class, she's so much more energetic. And your fitness doesn't improve that quickly, but you can change that circuit behaviour through exercise. And I think if we're going to take anything away from the talk today, it is understanding that mechanism of the influence of physical activity and exercise. So remember, the difference between physical activity and exercise is this. So physical activity is anything, all our movement snacks, walking the dog, doing the garden, doing the housework, you know, parking further away from the supermarket, whatever we're doing to just be active. But exercise is 20 minutes of, what did we do this morning? 20 minutes of barbell workout, or 20 minutes of HIIT. That controlled, where you're really pushing your fitness, both have an influence on what's called the central, okay, so your brain, and the peripheral, all right? So, you know, whether you feel heavy-legged, whether you can move, whether anything. So this understanding of what they now call in the neurobiology is looking about how exercise affects cognition, how we think about things, motivation, whether we're going to do the exercise or not, what mood we have, whether we're feeling high, low, depressed, even. I would say that I know when I exercise, my mood improves immediately, okay? And that whole thing to do with stress and immunity, as well as kind of losing weight, whether, you know, we talked about on Motivate Me, didn't we, about juggling, about getting your brain working. All of these things can make the brain control how we feel. So we know that when we exercise, it has an impact on depression, not clinical depression, which is a more chemical imbalance. It helps our sleep, and we've talked about the lymphatic system and the way the brain gets cleaned, but it's this kind of thing where this executive control. So this is all about processing, scheduling, planning, coordinating things, and things that you are starting to talk about in cafe. I can't do this today, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do this today and this one tomorrow and that on the next day, and I'm going to make sure I get it done. And so instead of feeling like you have to be here for all the sessions, you're kind of going like, yeah, I know I want to do the session, but I don't have to do it just because Rachel's live. I can do it when it suits me. Now, I kind of like the talk being at 7:30 because I think like you've done your workout, you can just sit down and listen to this. So what they were looking at is like kind of a range of studies and clinical trials that only looked at the positive influence of physical activity and fitness training on brain structure and function, okay? And they said it doesn't matter what age you start to exercise, even if you are midlife or over 50, you can still have these changes to your brain, whether that's learning or memory, you know, all the things that we talked about with hippocampus. And what they're saying is there's a positive clinical outcome for exercise in humans. And this looks at that brain growth factor and that exercise, especially when we are regular with it, affects that brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that BDNF we keep talking about. We also know it protects us ahead of the game. So, for example, you're exercising now, everything in your life is great and you can keep going and it all feels good, and then something happens. You fall, you break a leg, you lose a partner, you lose your job, anything kind of big stress things, you have that cognitive reserve. And I think that this is really interesting. What they said was that with BDNF, when we look at this cognitive reserve, 1 week of exercise made a difference. And I think like, we like the 20 minutes, don't we? Because we can go, I can do 20 minutes. I can even do 20 minutes together. That's still less than an hour. But 1 week of exercise changed the way the brain worked within a week. And I think actually this is true, because if you go on holiday, okay, so you might go somewhere, I don't know about you, I walk. Usually on holiday, I lose weight because I walk so much. And I think that's because camping, you know, because it's maybe not the same in the caravan, but when we used to camp in a tent, you know, the toilets might be miles away and I'd have to go for a wee in the middle of the night and a wee in the day, and I'd cycle my bike down there, or I'd cycle around, you know, villages, or I'd walk the dogs, and I would come back lighter than I went on holiday. But that whole thing within like 1 or 2 weeks can make you feel so much better. So how does physical activity change our what's called neuroplasticity? And it's all to do with that hippocampus. So we know that when we exercise, it significantly increases the mitochondria. Okay, remember we talked about ATP and the way that we manage that energy system, and improves BDNF in the hippocampus. And this whole kind of things will link to learning and memory. Now let's go back to Alzheimer's. It is the hippocampal volume, the grey matter volume, that is decreased when we have dementia. Okay, so you all know my mum's living with me now, and she has mild dementia. So she can tell you amazing stories about her life as a teenager and growing up in London and, you know, becoming a nurse. And she can tell you all the things in great detail. But she forgets the thing you've just told her. Okay, she'll forget it time and time and time again. And she writes it down and she's forgotten she's written it down. So it's that short-term memory that hippocampal volume diminishes. We know that exercise helps. And what's been very interesting for me, not that I'm using my mum as an experiment, but I make her walk a dog, and I don't walk her dog for her. Okay, so she's got to walk the dog, and I don't care what the weather's like. Okay, I think you still walk the dog. And I bought her a coat and proper walking shoes, and make things easier, remove the barriers that we talked about. But her depression has gone, which is great. So how do we get exercise to work for us? Two things. First, we want to increase that gene expression for BDNF. So when we talk about gene expression, we talk about this. So we may have a gene for something, okay, Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever, but it has to have the right conditions to thrive. Much like planting your plants. If you live in Bath at the moment, this wind is killing everything. So when the conditions are good, these things work. So we want to create that environment for our brain to allow our brain to grow. So we want to feed it the right food, we want to give it the right rest, and we want to exercise. That increases that BDNF that was key. But we also want to create that more volume. Okay, so we've got a cup full, so we're not pouring from an empty cup. And we want to improve the blood flow into the brain so that we can, make that exercise go in. And we know it happens immediately. We know within 1 week we can cause these changes. We also know that if our reserve is low, it can take one thing to knock you backwards. So we want to keep it up high. Chronic stress is one of the most damaging things to our brain. Food, I would say, is probably the other one, but food and stress are linked together. So when you get a dysregulation, when you get anxiety, or the stress is uncontrollable, when you're not stressed, you can suppress what they call the killer cell activity. So when we talked initially, we talked about the cellular and modular, and we talked about soft tissue and organs. We know that stress affects the organs of our body, including our brain and our heart and our blood vessels. So we want to make sure that we exercise continuously, that we do both aerobic and weights to make this work the best. You have to excuse me because my garlic mouth is getting beyond. So, for example, have you done an exercise program with me this week where you've had a lactic burn? Okay, so a lactic burn is when you're lifting the weights and your muscles feel on fire, or you've done HIIT and your body feels like it's on fire. So when we go into the energy system, we use glucose, okay, and protein to burn up. But if we are burning up energy quicker than we can deliver the oxygen, it burns energy in what they call an anaerobic fashion. And the side effect of burning glucose without sufficient oxygen is lactic acid. Now, it's a natural substance, okay, to think of it like the smoke from when you're burning fire. We know that when we have high levels of lactic acid in the muscles, so say like we've done something like, what do we do in HIIT? We did jumping up and down, we did jumping in kettlebells, we're doing jumping in kettlebells tomorrow for sure. We're going to have a look at when we do that high intensity, you get an immediate change in the speed of the way that the brain works. And you're like, okay. This is why they talk about the difference between physical activity and exercise. So if you are only doing your movement snacks and walking, There's nothing wrong with that. That will give you some protection to your brain as we get older. Because remember, as we get older, everything goes downhill. And we want to stop the speed that we're going downhill. But when you exercise that controlled 20 minutes, you have like a super boost to your brain when you hit your lactic threshold. So, both short-term high intensity and prolonged low intensity exercise that create this kind of chemical change within our skeletal muscles protects the brain during and after exercise. And it's really interesting because they looked at the way it changed both the muscular contraction but also the sensitivity and your control. They weren't quite sure about how this works, and there's far more studies more about this now, but they know it affects both the hippocampus and different other parts of the brain, the cerebellum. It affects our auditory and visual kind of responses. It protects our amygdala, and it has to happen when we push ourselves out of our comfort zone. And this also relates to our emotional control. How many of you here, right, when we teach kettlebells, and I teach kettlebells live, don't I, on a Thursday, the mood in the room is phenomenal because people feel amazing after doing kettlebells. There's no two ways about it. When you say you were buzzing after exercise, that is an actual thing where your brain, the sensory kind of emotion part of your brain, lights up when you push your body hard. If you don't exercise, a lot of the brain's working is to do with the level of body fat that we carry. We want to change our metabolic rate, okay? And remember, our metabolic rate raises when we exercise. It raises when we eat as well. So, but it's the way that we want to raise it. We know that people who just lose weight, okay, have an improved cognitive function. And there's a lot of things. Remember, there was a big fad, wasn't there, about fasting and about how people who are fasted have like a greater brain capacity. And you often see it in like third, more kind of holistic medicine, where, you know, the guru will go and fast for a few days because they reach that higher sense. And this is what they're finding now, is that fat, when we have too much fat either in the gut because we've eaten it, okay, you know what it's like. If you've eaten a meal that's high in fat, you feel very sluggish and lethargic, don't you? I'm guilty myself. Eating Christmas dinner, just like that, and you can't even stay awake on the settee. And when we fast, we have the opposite. So if you are both sedentary and overweight, this is where we see this huge kind of clash of issues that affect your brain, okay? So the cognitive function of the brain, but remember, this is a lot to do with this emotional control. So what can we do about it? I've given you all the answers already, haven't I? When we exercise, we know we get an immediate response to brain activity. So the more times we exercise, the more consistent we are with the exercise, the quicker this process becomes. So we want to exercise regularly and consistently. When we do exercise, we want to, if we can, if we're fit and well, we don't have any injuries, okay, or we're not overtired, we want to get into that slightly uncomfortable zone. And I love the phrases that you're all writing it, because I know you're all kind of going like, oh my God, that was really hard, but I loved it. You know, that kind of emotional response to high exercise is very interesting at week 4. And the second thing to do is the eating. Now, there's so much information. I've given you so many handouts about the brain-gut connection, the link between fermented foods and high plant-based foods, and everything else like that. In terms of your cognitive health, creating that environment for your brain to grow is there. So it's always the same 4 pillars: exercise, sleep, get rid of stress, have good social relations. And I think that we can influence this neurobiology by varying the amount of exercise we do on a weekly basis and doing some hard exercise. So we're not always at that low intensity, that we change it, that we look at different ways to improve or do different things. So this time we've been doing more classical Pilates, which has been a little bit more taxing on the body. We've been doing a little bit more impact in the classes, which has been a little bit more taxing. I have given you 5 days of workouts, and 4 of those days are really hard. Okay, so you've done weights in the morning, weights in the evening. We didn't used to do that. We used to kind of go like, I'd have one hard one, one easy one. So how we change, and do you remember something called muscle memory? So like if you've ever ridden a bike, you never forget how to ride a bike, but learning to ride a bike was quite stressful. But once you got the hang of it, even if you haven't been on a bike for like 20 years, you can still balance a bike because your body remembers. You want to keep going through that same cycle where you remind your body what to do and how to do it, and not to do everything the same all the time, not to follow that same path. It's like that thing I keep telling you about driving home. If it's always the same, yes, it's good. So like Pilates, hone that thing, get it down, but then, add a change of direction. Pilates is very clever because it does work on changing direction. So we need to have that exercise stimulus to overcome that central nervous system. We need to understand the impact that exercise has on the brain. We need to look for the changes immediately after the exercise experience, as well as the long-term effect. And we need to know how much does exercise prime the brain to give you that cognitive reserve. We also know that much of the studies have been done on either young people, okay, so students in college who sign up for research so they get paid, or old people because they're in a nursing home and we can control and regulate their activity and their exercise and their diet. And this mid part of the life, okay, where we've got things, we might have kids, we might have elderly parents, we're going on holiday, we've got a stressful job, we can't regulate our exercise. There's not much evidence here. So they're starting to look at these kind of key times. When do we start to change? When do we start the aging process? Are you male? Are you female? Are you going through the menopause? All of these things influence our change in behaviour, our cognition, our mood, our stress resistance, and how much exercise we do. And it should be important to look at what happens when we don't do it. And I think I've done talks about what are the consequences of not doing it. So understanding that kind of mechanics of movement in terms of the emotional response, and how we can have regular physical activity to activate this central and sympathetic. We talked about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, didn't we? So how do we modulate that, and how do we understand that exercise is so important in terms of how it influences the brain, because it's the brain that then controls motivation to exercise, mood, cognition, and how we grow the brain in that beautiful environment. I just find this whole area So fascinating. And as you know, I've done a lot of work on menopause and the influence of estrogen or lack of estrogen on the brain in terms of how it speeds up aging is a whole other issue, because I think females in particular are the target of telling people, take it a bit easy now. Why are you doing all that exercise? Why are you 50 and starting to do kettlebells? You know, mind your business. And the lady who went from being osteoporotic to osteopenic told me, she said, I've done everything you've talked about. I've carried the heavy shopping bags. I've told people, she said, because when she was first diagnosed with having osteoporosis, she like made her life small, you know, very scared. She was scared to do anything. She was scared to do walking. She was scared to do anything. And it's taken her 2 years, okay, so 2 years of change, of understanding that she needed to do more, not less, and doing all the things like walking the extra distances, getting the steps in, doing the movement snacks, carrying heavy things, wearing a rucksack. So she said, when I used to go for a walk, I used to put the rucksack on and 2 litres of water in my rucksack and carry my rucksack, making sure that, you know, I did it more regularly. And she just says, she was just like, she was on a high, because the doctor says it's unbelievable what you've done. And I think if you can reverse that aging, how fantastic is that? And it's okay to read the research papers, but you want to hear real stories, don't you? You want to hear about people who've made the change. And I would say now that I am teaching Pilates of I wouldn't say a more technical level than I have done in the past. Well, it's 2015 that I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So in the 10 years post-exercise, post-operative kind of trauma I had, and then lockdown and all the other operations, because after being diagnosed, you know, there were many operations, weren't there? And then there was lockdown, which was also a trauma. And then I lost, you know, left my job and all of that. I'm fitter now. I look older, but I'm actually fitter. And I came across a video, because Facebook has been like, we're deleting all of your videos. If you want to keep your videos, you've got to download them. So I was going through my videos on my Facebook page, and I came across a video of 10 years ago. And I think I look in better shape now than I did 10 years ago. It's not about my outside shape, but I feel I can do more. I can do more things. I can now teach all my classes. Thursday night I can't sleep very well because I'm so exhausted, but I'm thinking, that's not bad. It's not about me, is it? It's just me. But I like to use me as an experiment. I practice what I preach, isn't it? All right, I'm up to time. I don't know, can I have a look if there's any kind of comments on here now? No comments. Okay, so there is no handout with this one, but I found an old handout about bring connection and food, and I found an old handout about the influence of exercise. But I could do a handout to summarise that paper if you wanted to, because I really found it interesting. But give me some feedback, and hopefully you enjoyed as well. And let's keep working, because we're doing really, really well. And people are saying such positive things about the cafe this time. So Cafe Rachel, I think, has been a big success for you, I hope. And let's see how much fitter we feel after the next 3 weeks. So we've got 3 weeks left of exercise. We've got this week, the week after, and leading up to the 12th of July. Let's just really, really go for it. Come on, just 3 weeks. Let's just really see if we can make a difference. The journaling is key to seeing this change, because I want to see that emotional change that we talked about, not as in like you feel emotional, but in terms of motivation and positivity. Diolch yn fawr. See you all soon. I'm going to brush my teeth again. I still stink of garlic. I feel like it. And I love garlic, so I don't know why. Maybe it was something else. Anyway, take care. See you all tomorrow morning. Kettlebells with jumping. Take care. Hwyl fawr. Noswaith dda.